let's start off with how to balance your bow with all the weights and stuff that are there that you can utilize in your setup.
So, coaches will commonly go to a default setting with setting up stabilization for your bow. If I grab my riser and just demonstrate the kind of thing that they would use to start setting up a stabilizing setup. So if you take your riser and stabilizer setups, and then if you take it upside down, so you get it upside down. If you take the point where your riser first meets your stabilization, and then you come 1 inch away from it, that's your new balancing point. Well, that's the balancing point which you're trying to aim to keep it on a level plane. So it won't fight against like mine is. It will try and drop away. It won't try and do that. It will stay steady.
So what I personally do, and I'm pretty sure Shaun does, is our setups are done differently to that. What we do is we just throw everything on our bow and go and shoot it. Then we'll change it around a bit and get it to a point where we've got something that works well for us. So we've got a nice tight holding pattern, but also got the reaction of the bow on release that we desire. And the way we can do that is by changing the angle of stuff and just the weight of the stuff, and just in pretty much any way we can.
So it's all about positioning those weights correctly for your own personal preference.
So you can have stuff angled down. You've got angles on your front rod as well, so you can angle that down and things like that. So it's all about lowering that center of gravity for us. So lengths of rods, we can go all the way down to, let's say, 26 inch, I think, for a long rod, and an 8 inch for a side rod. But at the same time, you get 36 plus on a long rod and 15 on a side rod. What's that all about, Shaun?
So I personally go in with the thought of I try and get my weight as far away from me as possible, so that I can be more exact with where I place my weight. If we think about the flip side of that, if you've got really short side rods and really short long rods, you've got to put a lot more weight on it to get the same effect as if it was further away. In the same respect for the side rods as well, you've got to put more weight on them, which you would end up with a heavier setup where it will feel the same.
So next thing we move on to is dampers. It's something that's lacking in our setups, as you'll see later on, but often very popular within other people's. Basically, we've gone and found 3 sets of dampers, and we're now going to explain how we would use them to best effect for our setups.
So with dampers, you've got, again, it's 2 ends of the spectrum. Please slow. So we've got 2 ends of the spectrum. We've got short little dampers and long dampers. So if we start at the long damper end, we've got, if you imagine that at the end of a long rod, you'll get, as the vibration runs up it, the weight would be moving in a kind of in a lateral way, so it's moving from side to side. That's how they're designed to be. That's why they've got the ridges on the sides. There's not much vertical movement. So on the other end, we've got small little dampers that they haven't got much sideways movement, but they've got a lot of vertical movement, or in the up and down movement. So you would use them for different things. So you would use this for a long rod because you want it to be as effective as efficient as possible for eating up that the vibrations that run through it. Whereas you would want these placed on a riser so that it would take up the much higher frequency vibration that this would struggle to get rid of.
So next up, we've got V-bars. You've seen us mentioning how exactly we want to get a low center of gravity, and how we do that is by utilizing a V-bar. We've got 2 examples here. We've got a fixed V-bar, and then we've got an adjustable one. We both use adjustable ones to get that low centre of gravity feel that we like. And we got the fixed one here, which doesn't really give you any chance. But what you're looking for is something that's rock solid. Something that will hold all that weight if you've got a very heavy setup. Something that won't come loose in an adjustable one. Something that's just generally strong and will take all the fight that it takes to hold up a stabilizer.
So a feature that is prominent in the adjustable setups, especially on the higher end ones where you're looking at potentially building a lot of weight onto the side rods, is the inclusion of a toothing system into its construction. So instead of having two flat planes that go together that could be twisted like that, you've got teeth which lock together that stop any of that movement.
So one thing to take note of here is the teeth will limit your adjustability a bit. So for example, in this V-bar, you're limited to notches of 7.5 degrees. In others, it may be 15, maybe even more. So what you're looking for is something that's strong, but also still giving you that full adjustability. More adjustable, it's going to be slightly weaker, whereas something that's less adjustable. So it's a balancing act between the two. One thing that's very important to mention is stabilizers have always been very much of trends. We've seen this happen over years, from right when they started. And right now the big main trend is the USA setups versus the Korean setups and how they differ.
So with the USA setups, you commonly find that it's a lot heavier setups, and it's all about building as much weight into your setup as possible, so that it holds steady in the wind, and it's all about positioning of your muscles and things like that. Whereas the Korean side of things is all about getting the shot away as easy as possible, and through that a lighter setup is created to allow for that.
Don't get caught up in these trends. It's very important you don't. You've got to set up your stabilizers to work to you. A perfect example of this would be the 2012 Olympian on the American team, Jacob Wookie. He blatantly ignored these trends and went for something that really worked well for him, and it showed. He's gone far in his archery career, and he trusts within his bow, and he's got all of that there. Another thing to mention would be brands. Don't buy a stabilizer because your favourite archer shoots well with it. Buy a stabilizer because you shoot well with it.
Yeah, so I'd always recommend going into a shop and really trying out everything that they will allow you to try out, basically. Just going and ask to try out the high end and then work your way down, and then feel like you buy it because it feels good rather than you buy it because of its brand.
What have you got in your personal setup then, Shaun?
Right, if I grab my riser. So my setup is quite a weird setup. It's so we've got our standard long rod, extender, and V-bar and side rods. But one thing that you might not commonly see is my extender is always on my bow, even though it's not. It's always just before my long rod. Now that's there to give me that extra little bit of length that we were talking about earlier, to get the weight as far away as possible from me. So that's constantly on there. I've got my V-bar, which is a Doinker tooth V-bar with 15-inch bee stinger side rods. Now one thing to mention with this setup is the angles in which the V-bar is set up with. So as you can see, I've got this side rod right the way out to the left hand side to give that resistance setup that we talked about before. Now I chose to go for this to keep my mind engaged within the shot all the way through the shot. Now if we look at Tom's,
Yep.
Do you want your
long
rod?
rod? Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So as we go into looking at Tom's, you'll find that he hasn't got a resistive setup and he's got a few of the things, like he hasn't got an extender in there, he's got his V-bar right next to his riser, just like I've got mine. All of his stabilizers is the fuse blades, carbon blades, ESs.
So if we look at it from the back first, what we see is a much evener setup. I think there's one notch difference between each side. That's to pull this one out a little bit more to offset the sight. Then if we move around to the side, what we've got is a setup that's angled down a bit like Shaun's, but nowhere near as much. Again, this is just personal preference. The way I look at it is it lowers the centre of gravity. What we can do is relate that to a Formula 1 car. Really low centre of gravity, very stable, can go around corners quickly. In case of archery, we've got low centre of gravity, really stable, easier to hold well in the wind, in my opinion.
One thing to mention on Tom's is the sheer amount of mass weight that you've got going on here. How many ounces you got on each side?
So right now I've got 9 ounces on each side, so it's 18 in total at the back and just 12 at the front. So again, common trend is we've got more weight on the back than the front, but that's to give us the feel that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And the weight is so I find it's easier to hold well in the wind. I'm one person that has what is a fairly long shot, and I like to hold the bow nicely in the aiming process with a nice holding pattern. So that's why I've got everything placed out the way it is.
I think that pretty much wraps up stabilisation. If you with the information that we've shared with you today, feel free to send us pictures of your stabilisation, and if there's any changes that you've made due to the information we've shared with you, we would love to find out exactly what you've done.
So for that, you can go to our Facebook, which is ArcheryBuzz, or our Twitter @ArcheryBuzz. There'll be links in the description down below for that. As well, thank you for watching. If you could give us a like if you enjoyed the video, bit of constructive criticism in the comments, maybe what you found as well that may differ from what we've done, and obviously subscribe if you want to see more of us. Cool. So thank you for watching again, and we'll see you next week with your video of choice.